this is how God draws us to Him. And this is how our own soul draws us to a greater reality, is not by dogma, but by experience. This is how Jamal talks about it being science. You conduct the experiment. What would happen if? When I was first told about the idea of karma and reincarnation, what did I know about that given my upbringing? But I decided I would start looking at the world as if there was such a thing as karma, as if there was such a thing as reincarnation. And what would the world look like? I applied that as a template to circumstances I was looking at, and all of a sudden many mysteries were solved. It began to work for me. I remember once a man saying to me, just sort of like, he waited till I was completely in private, I'd been giving classes on this subject. He said, "Do you really believe that stuff?" Just like that. I said, "Yeah, actually I do." Because I've done the experiment. And so that's what we all have to do. That's what we're doing all the time. We have a choice of how to live. We either just blow with the wind and just take whatever is coming and just hope that we don't crash and burn too terribly. But unfortunately in this world it's exceedingly insecure. You know, I'm old enough now to have watched people raise their children, see how the children turn out. I've seen all the high hopes that the parents have. I have multi-generational friendships, so I can see all the whole sides of it. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't quite work out so well, does it? But we all just still hope. But there's a point at which we don't just have to just hope. You know, there are living examples, there are methods, there are ways that we can be different. When I came to live at the Ananda Ashram back in 1971, I was there for one reason, and that was to learn from Swami Kriyananda. And I just attached myself to him like a mollusk, or just like this. And fortunately, he responded to me. He recognized my sincerity, and I became his secretary, and I worked with him for a number of years. I thought I would do that forever, but it turned out not to be true. But immediately what I had intuited literally in that first moment that I saw him, was constantly confirmed by everyday contact with him. And believe me, his life was not easy. It wasn't. We have this idea that, oh, I'll get on the spiritual path and all difficulties will go away. Everybody will be nice to me from now on. Please, I'm so sorry to have to tell you, but it's not going to work. Even a little bit of this spiritual practice will save you from dire fears and colossal sufferings, but dire fears and colossal sufferings still keep come knocking at the door. There's just another way to deal with it. And what I saw in the life of Swami Kriyananda was not a life freed from challenge, but someone who knew how to meet challenge head on, with courage, with tools, with faith, with energy, all of the things Jamal's talking about that Kriya practice gives you. And from very early on I realized that I was a witness to something very unusual. That a man like this is not born in the world very often. A man like this is not born in the world very often. And Swami Kriyananda was one of his commissioned spiritual children, who was to take what the Master put into the world and translate it into an actual way of life. That's why we had communities. That's why he wrote 150 books on all the subjects that people have to deal with. Raising children, educating children, making money, having ethics in business, how to be a creative artist, what to speak of all the philosophical subjects, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, all these things. But he himself was the greatest teaching, which is, what do you do when your health breaks down, when your closest friends betray you, when you're constantly faced with money challenges, when people are dishonest in regard to you, when lawsuits are filed against you, when your reputation is destroyed in public. I mean, so that we begin to find that spiritual life is not a free ride, but it is the beacon of light that goes through it. And very early in my spiritual life, he said, what I sort of already knew, but he put it into words, which is that you have to write my life. And he told me that when I was 24. I wrote it, I finished it just a little while ago. I mean, I finished the actual writing a little less than a year ago. It took a while to get it published. I worried about it every single day. There wasn't one day in my life after he told me that I wasn't anxious about the responsibility. But he'd said to me when I was 24, he said, I will help you. And finally, when I really sat down to write the book that we're launching today, he helped me. He told me what his life was for, and he gave me the words to be able to say it. Now, I'm here, I mean, I wouldn't be here anyway, the coincidence of having just published this book. But what we need in our lives is we need examples. Not only because those examples literally can teach us, but think about in your own life how the people who have more power than you do in the ways that you want to have it, whether it's your mother, your father, your friend, your spouse, your children, people who know what you're trying to learn and can give you some of what they have. I mean, this is how the world works. That's how it's organized. And this is why we, advocate Yogananda's life. This is why all those who have learned these spiritual teachings have so much to teach us. This world is a very, the word I want to use is lonely place. And whenever we find kindred spirits, whether they're still on the planet or whether their spirit is here, even if their bodies are gone, those kindred spirits are really what carry us through, isn't that so? And that's what we're all hoping for with our families and our relatives. And sometimes your biological relationships are also your kindred spirits. And sometimes they're not. But whenever you're fortunate anywhere in your life to find anyone who lives in the world the way you want to live in the world, that's a gift beyond measure. And when that comes to you, we have to open our hearts and accept the blessing. Because that's the biggest gift from God. That's why every single day I thank God, because Swami walked into the room and I just knew who he was. And I knew what he meant to my life. And I've had a lot of ups and downs. I'm just like everyone else. I've had days that lasted forever. Long, long, sad days. I've had enough tears to fill quite a few buckets. But I always knew that I had divine friends. And some of my divine friends are my peers, and some of them are my teachers. But holding on and following that ray when it comes to you, that's what Krishna was talking about. That's what will save us. All of us want the same thing. It doesn't matter where we were born, what country, what it looks like. I've been riding around Singapore looking out the window trying to understand what's here. What's here is a whole lot like Palo Alto. What's here is a whole lot like Delhi. It's a whole lot like Bali and Chiang Mai, every place I've ever been in the world, Paris, because every sentient being wants to escape suffering and find happiness. And we can, you see. That's the great promise of this life that we all know intuitively. You see, if we didn't know, if we didn't believe it was possible, we just give up. But we don't. And because we persevere, God opens doors. And if we have the courage and the willingness and the longing, we walk through them. So, God bless you all.
Thank you, Asha ji, for that beautiful yet inspiring talk and sharing so many nuggets of your own life experience with people here. It was just beautiful. So we are now going to launch Asha ji's book. This book has been in the making for 44 years. So like she mentioned during her talk, I think 1 or 2 years into her life, Swamiji gave her this beautiful task of penning his life story down. That book, I did take a sneak peek in. just so that I can share some things with you, and also because I was too curious and just wanted to know what is inside. Has beautiful spiritual nuggets. You see Swami Kriyananda in the way of what a disciple should be. In that she shares beautiful, that's the book, thanks Anand for putting that up. So that book talks about insider information, if I may use that, of what his life was, of the spiritual teachings which come directly from Paramahansa Yogananda. So it's a beautiful, inspiring book, and I'd like to invite Asha ji on stage, and also Yogi ji. This is the first. Yogi ji doesn't like to come up in the forefront. He's usually someone who stays behind, but he is the reason why the center in Singapore exists. The Kriya Satsang Center in Singapore exists. He is the reason why most of us volunteers are here today as well. I remember seeing pictures on Facebook of him and a few other volunteers painting the walls of the center, so that's where they started from. So we would like Asha ji to kindly present the book to Yogi ji, and then
This is actually a new copy. I mean, this is a bit of a big ceremony for a book I've been selling in America for a month, but this is actually the copies printed in India because it was also published there. So it is my great pleasure. After all this time, having met you in the kitchen of the Gorgon Ashram all those years ago, to present this to you. I offer this to you with a profound and serious prayer that the Spirit that is Swami Kriyananda will speak to you through these pages, that He will inhabit your heart, and that He will guide and bless you in all that you do. I actually have one more request on this. I've never raised children. I never had any of those 12 children that I plan to have, not one. But this is my baby. And I have observed with my friends, they raise their children at a certain point. The child goes off and has a life that the parents don't witness and they don't know anything about, and they develop friends and experiences. And I mean, I worked hard on this book, but as soon as I finished it, I really felt like it wasn't mine anymore. Really not at all. It's partly because I felt like Swami wrote it through me, really honestly. But also, it just now has a life of its own, and that its mission is a very simple one, is to awaken people to their own potential and to give them the opportunity to walk through that door into greater joy. So what I consider the of this book is the prayers of all of you, that whoever is destined to have their life uplifted by Swami Kriyananda, as I and countless others have, that somehow this book will find them and touch them, and they can go forward, because we're all in this together. And so that would be what I would consider to be the launching of this book. Thank you.
So now we've come to the question and answer segment. I'd like to invite Jamaji on stage. And if you have a question, you can raise your hands. We have volunteers around who can pass the mic to you or pass a little post-it for you to write your questions down.
My name is Catherine. For the last 10 years, I've been battling with my addiction for alcohol. So I don't know how I've been going for meditation and all this for the last 10 years, but nothing seemed to work for me. So I was hoping today morning when I came, something will come up for me here today.
there are those who are very addicted to alcohol, and this comes from past lives that we have done these particular things, and I hope there's no judgment in this room, that we all have different things that we get addicted to in other lives, and then in this lifetime we come and we try to change that habit because we're evolved enough now to know that it doesn't work, that we run up against a big wall, that we have a huge habit. But if you sincerely desire to break that habit, that it can be done. That there are obviously 12-step programs, but the way that that program would work is that you are with other people who have magnetism, and you're with a group of friends, and the whole group of friends says, we don't want to do this anymore. And as a group, you will help be able to overcome that particular addiction. I don't want to take all the time on this, but I had a dream one time that I was drinking alcohol. I won't go into the details of this dream. It's interesting, but I don't have time. And then the next day, Swami Kriyananda actually was the most amazing being I ever met. He knew my thoughts, but beyond that, he even knew what I was dreaming. And he was giving a satsang one day, and he just looked at me and he just said, we don't have to worry about this anymore. And in that moment, I was well over drugs and alcohol at that time. They simply don't work. But in that moment, I felt that he had given me a blessing that I knew that would be lifelong and that would change me. And so the point that's trying to be made here is that there are human beings, whether you find them in a 12-step program or whether you find them on the spiritual path, but if you sincerely desire in your heart to change, and you open yourself up to some power that's higher than you, that power can enter in and take charge of your life and give you the power to overcome those habits. Never identify yourself with any of your habits. You are not those habits. You are the soul, and the soul is stronger than those habits. So the most and the best that I can do today is give you hope. I promise you that you can overcome any addiction that you want to, if you will not only do it with your own will, but draw on a higher source, on a higher power to come and strengthen your will. And it's up to you to figure out what that higher source is, with that higher power. But don't worry, I promise you, you can do it, and you will do it.
Hi, I just want to raise this question on behalf of my wife. She's by profession, she's a doctor. She has raised well, and in her life, so many friends she has made, but maybe she got cheated, never had a good friendship with them. So that experience stops her to make further relations, trust to the people, and those things in life. So how she can overcome that experience she has got, because that influence somewhere, in fact, affects the future relationships. So that's
When I was in my 44 years of knowing Swami Kriyananda and watching him, there was always a mystery about him that I could never quite understand, and I actually sincerely misunderstood it for many years. He was so open to people. He was so trusting, he was so giving of his heart. He just never protected himself at all. And yet many people betrayed him. And in fact, he had a lifelong conflict that escalated to literally 12 years of litigation, which is with his own Guru Bhais. It was just like about as terrible as anything you could imagine. And yet he never closed his heart to anyone. I thought he didn't experience suffering in the same way that other people did. Because my way of dealing with suffering was to suppress my feelings. I just closed down, and I was aloof, and I was contracted, and I thought that was spiritual. So I thought that's what he was doing. And only very slowly did I realize that in fact, his heart was far more tender than mine. And just as Jamal was saying, he could read people's thoughts. He could feel their consciousness even when they didn't speak. And he was aware of much more than I was. So his capacity to stay open was not because he didn't suffer. It was because he trusted. That's a very subtle point, really. He trusted that the way to freedom that suffering teaches us, and that the way to freedom was to see that there's always a higher purpose and a plan, and that the only reason that we suffer is because we have attached ourselves to the wrong things. And when you attach yourself to people behaving a certain way and they don't behave that way, you suffer. As he put it really simple, I lost my, if I ever believed in human nature, he said, I would have lost my faith a long time ago. He said, I believe in the presence of God acting through people for my own and everyone else's highest good. Now, is that easy? No, actually. It's really, really difficult. And speaking of what you were saying, that's why we anesthetize ourselves. But the fact is, sooner or later, we have to develop the courage to see what's real and then see beyond it. And the reason not to hold yourself closed in is really simple. The reason not to anesthetize yourself with drugs or drinking or sugar or television or whatever it might be is because it doesn't work. It's really, really simple. It just doesn't work. It doesn't bring us what we think it's going to bring us. And when the experience of suffering is greater than the effort of changing, that's the point when we'll change. And no one can do that for you. But what you can do, both of your questions, is you can work over here to have a bigger experience. So your fear of people here, the necessity to drink here, just put it aside and add positive into your life. And when you add positive in your life, it begins to give you positive experiences which gradually contrast to those negative experiences. Swami said that to me once in a situation. He said, you've taken it as far as you can go. You need to just put it on a shelf now and develop yourself in other ways. And then you can circle back and deal with it. Which is sort of the philosophy I followed. If it's too big and it's going to defeat me, I run away. And go train myself where I can. And then suddenly I turn back and I become bigger. And then I can make myself deal with it. Does that help?
Don't be shy. More questions? Hi. In the second talk, you mentioned God a few times. So is it in a religious sense or something else?
I think we both should talk about this. I think I can speak for both of us to begin with, that both of us feel deeply a longing, a respect for God, but I'm also very sensitive to the fact that many people want nothing to do with God. That growing up in America, people told me that I must believe in the way they believe or I would burn forever in hell. Swami Kriyananda told us that finite cause can never have an infinite effect. And as soon as I heard that, okay, I don't know if the Christians are right or wrong, but at least that makes sense. A finite cause can never have an infinite effect. I personally like to let each person develop their own understanding, their own relationship with God. It's not something that I want to force upon anyone, that each person has to understand what does God mean to them. There was an atheist in Australia And he loved what Swamiji said, but he told Swamiji, I'm an atheist, how can I process all of this? What do you have to say to me? And Swamiji said to him, why don't you think of God as the highest image of your own self that you can understand? Meaning that if you want to be more compassionate, more loving, more whatever, think of God as that. It's a beautiful understanding. But anyway, each person needs to have the freedom to approach God in his or her own way. Yet I do feel, at least for myself, that it's a vital part of life. Otherwise I look around this world and I just say, what is going on? How does this work? But if there's something higher that I can relate to, then I have a direction that I can go. I want to say one more point on this, then I'll hand the microphone over. But in India, many people worship idols, I-D-O-L-S. And Christians, of course, will say, oh, hell and brimfire, terrible, that you can't worship idols, that it needs to just be abstract principles. Yet, of course, what is Christ on the cross? That's an idol that people put up in their home. And so, ignorance actually is 50-50. But what I really like to worship is ideals. That if Ram is an ideal, that I want to be like that particular man, or Krishna, or Jesus Christ, then I can't just, it's hard for me to worship something in an abstract way. If you're a scientist, you might love contemplating infinity and looking out at all the stars. But still, I want to have a picture up of all of those different galaxies so I can remember that I'm trying to expand my consciousness. Anyway, that's a long, long question that we could talk about. But at the end, I have to say that it's your own personal journey, and I deeply respect that.
And when we speak English and use the word God, it has absolutely no meaning if you think about it. I mean, it really doesn't. It's a very non-specific word. Everybody gives it a meaning according to how they've been brought up, or, positive or negative according to the context, the theology that was defined. It has absolutely no meaning. And so a lot of people, when I would teach meditation courses and so on, they would come in and say, believe in God. And I would say, well, I probably don't believe in the God that you have rejected either, because it's some concept that simply doesn't make any sense to you. And with all due respect, or without that respect, a lot of people's concept of God is not attractive, not even slightly. And so any thinking person would naturally reject it. So what you have to think about, and not think of it like this, when I'm trying to use words that will not cause nobody to react. Life is an expansion of awareness. Kavita has a little boy who's 3 years old, and he was following us around a lot yesterday, or we were following him, actually. And he was in a constant, unrelenting, you might almost call it a desperate request to find out what everything in the world is, period. And we went to the beautiful orchid garden that you have here, and there were some fountains like this, and it was a hot day, and I like water. I just put my hands in the water. So Kester picked him up and carried him to the water, and he was sort of going to touch the water, but then no, he didn't want to touch the water. And I realized he's 3 years old. The water is moving, it's making a lot of noise. As far as he was concerned, it could have jumped off of the fountain and consumed him at any moment. The awareness that water is inert, that it's not going to move, that it's harmless. These are huge awarenesses that a 3-year-old child didn't have. It was just a moving object that might hurt him. So he would, cluster up, but he really wasn't going to go into that water for anything at all. But he will gradually expand his awareness, and he will learn, many things about the nature of this world. Well, it's an inward expansion too. We gradually learn where happiness comes from, what causes us suffering, what pleasure is, what pain is. All the things that we learn. Everything that you learn is an expansion of awareness. Jace was trying to learn to use a spoon to pick up the rice and then find his mouth, And sometimes he found his mouth, and sometimes he found some other part of himself, But gradually he would develop the awareness every time. So, I didn't think of it. I just put rice on my spoon and put it in my mouth. But I didn't always know that. So what I think is the most helpful way in terms of God is don't be an atheist or an agnostic or a blind believer. Be a truth seeker. And just ask yourself what's true. And don't get stuck on vocabulary, because we hardly ever know what we're really saying to each other anyway. So just ask yourself, can I know more than I presently know? Because if you put an end point on it and say this isn't true, then you have just defined yourself and you get to stay exactly as you are. Like, is that such a treat? Is that something that we want to defend? So you can claim what you do know, because if you're an intelligent thinking person, you have a right to claim what you do know. But you also have to have the humility to recognize, there might be things I don't know. I'll tell you one just small funny story on this, and then I'll give it back. When I first came to Ananda village, which is the ashram I lived into, there was this man there, his name was Benai, and he had developed, we had nothing. We had no buildings, no nothing, and he had built this little, he was making jewelry out of bits of wood and wildflowers that he gathered, and he had his little shop in this old abandoned van that had just been rusting on the property. So he put his little business inside of this. Then some other person decided it was an eyesore, hauled the whole thing off and pushed it over the cliff into the dump somewhere. So I hear him saying, Mother, now he's speaking of Divine Mother, but I had never heard it like that. Mother inspired me to make this business, but then Mother took it away from me. I guess Mother wants me to do something else, I think, because in America we're not so, you don't stay with our parents after we grow up. I think he's pretty old to just be doing what his mother wants him to do. It seemed really weird to me. And then when I heard he was actually talking about God, it was so strange I didn't have any idea what to do with it. Absolutely none. It was just the strangest thing I'd ever heard. Then I say something to Swamiji about a difficulty I have, and Swami so lovingly says to me, just give it to Divine Mother. And I just stared at him like, and? You know, like, and what am I supposed to do? It was just, again, it was just crazy to me. But I was trapped, because I knew that Swami Kriyananda knew more than I did. And so even if he seemed completely nuts to me, and I didn't have any idea what to do with it, I couldn't reject it. Because I had faith in my own understanding, but enough humility to know I didn't know everything. 7 years later, some girl comes up to me, she has this terrible problem. I say, just give it to Divine Mother. She looks at me with an expression I recognize. And anyway, that's the story.
Next question.
Hello everyone, this is Deepthi. First of all, I have to thank everyone for giving me this such opportunity, especially in Singapore. Thank you, and I'm very blessed to meet you and all, because you are having 50 years of, it's not an easy thing. And the main inspiration for me to come in is my mother, who practices yoga and meditation, and my uncle. And I strongly believe, sorry if I'm taking this, I just want to share my experience. I recently given birth to a small little girl. During that time, I was working as a software engineer, and I have gone through some videos, and somewhere I felt that I have to go to this path which benefits my baby too. And in such a way that I was so into my job, I left the job and I went back to India. And I got my uncle and my mother, I got so many of teachings regarding this yoga and meditation. And I have got the book of Guruji also. And I'm just starting this, but somewhere I feel that so many people say that there is a karma, there is a believers of karma that brings us to this path. Do we need to really believe this, or shall we just go forward what we believe?
Sure, you don't have to believe in karma. It's still going to be there, whether you believe in it or not. You can believe in gravity or not believe in gravity, but it's a law in the universe which holds things together. But I would suggest that you put together a set of beliefs that work for you, and then carry on accordingly. But at the same time, never be afraid to look at those system of beliefs. Never be afraid to question them. and ask, is it working? As you walk on this path or any other path, in the beginning, it's quite right to take a look and look at each set of the beliefs and say, do I really believe this? Do I really believe this? And sometimes, as Asha ji was saying, in Autobiography of a Yogi, someone's meditating, you just, or whatever, they're dematerializing as well, page 8, you just have no idea what to do with that, and you don't know if you can believe it because it's outside of the boundary line or the horizon of our own experience. Yet, as I've grown spiritually, that I've seen, well, Paramahansa Yogananda said this, and he said this, and he said this, and yes, I've had this experience, yes, I've had this, yes, I've had this. He said that, I haven't had this one yet, but because of all of the past experience, I can say, I think then that I choose to believe him, and I want to continue to grow. I want my own understanding to continue to grow so that I understand how these things work. Also, don't be afraid to sit down and analyze something like karma deeply within your own self. That you're much smarter, all of us, than we know. That we don't always have to rely on some outside authority to tell us it is like this or it isn't. We can simply just sit down in silence and think life through. Ask questions of, why do I have some particular habit, even though I wasn't born in that society that has that habit, or whatever the case may be. And we start thinking about who we truly are and why we are the way that we are, and then we begin, some of these things make sense.
Why especially I want to ask this is, I want to make this as a habit in my lifestyle. And I don't want to deviate from this. So I think the same question many of us are having it. Because sometimes we think that, okay, tomorrow morning I have to wake up and do the yoga or meditation. But sometimes some obstacle comes in the life, we can't follow it. So is there anything that we can do so that we can make a part of it? Like,
I think you're asking the same question my friend asked. Is there a shortcut?